Hello there, my name's Mr. Cow. I am the mind responsible for the little-known, amateurly animated Men with Umbrellas. And as you may or may not know, I've been using this YouTube channel as a place to share my ideas for my next big animated, fairy tale inspired project. And boy, am I excited. This is gonna be cool. It's gonna be cool, my man. So, for this video, what we're trying to do is we are trying to find the heart of what this new animated project is going to be. Because right now, we know it's gonna be fairy tale inspired. We know it's gonna be a similar world to Men with Umbrellas, but Men with Umbrellas was never really the most digestible for public consumption. And that's something I want to fix with this new project. So in order to do that, I want to find the heart of this project. And by that, I mean I want to find the sort of one-sentence pitch. I want to find something that you as an audience can see and latch onto and sort of understand what the idea of the show is going to be before delving into the more complicated elements of the series. So that's what we're gonna do here. However, before we do it, we are going to take a look at Men with Umbrellas itself and see a little bit of what maybe worked and what maybe didn't. Before we talk about Men with Umbrellas, though, we have to talk about my first animation project. Well, not really my first, but my first that is open for you to see right now. And that is the animation which I titled Sundoor 12. Now, I wish I could tell you that there was some really interesting thoughts behind Sundoor 12. However, the main driving force behind Sundoor 12 was just that I wanted to make an animation. So I took some science fiction-esque ideas that seemed interesting to me, put them in a blender, and spat out Sundoor 12. And although Sundoor 12 by no means was perfect, it was a big driving force on my animation journey. But then I would have my next big idea. And that big idea I called Men with Umbrellas. Now the original version of Men with Umbrellas was very different than the version that you saw that actually came out and was made. The original version of Men with Umbrellas followed a non-Mad Hatter Jefferson Strange along with a John Watson and a Rod Manson that had no connection to Arthurian legend. However, as I carried on, I realized that that group didn't exactly make sense. It's confusing. What is the group even about? It's sort of a wild choice to have John Watson in a world where, in my original version, Sherlock Holmes didn't even exist. And Rod Manson was meant to be Cain from the Bible, but it was sort of meant to be a tongue-in-cheek reference more than this is actually who the character is. And I think eventually in this initial version, I also may have had the idea to bring in the Thomas Locke Loki character, but it wasn't very long into writing my scripts that I realized this group of characters just didn't make sense. And that's when I would come up with the group of characters that would actually make it in to the final animation that we all know and maybe some of us love, the Men with Umbrellas. And that group of characters was Jefferson Strange, now reimagined as the Mad Hatter. Rod Manson, now reimagined as Mordred from Arthurian legend. William Grimm, who was also the Pied Piper, as well as the Thomas Locke character, who of course was Loki from Norse mythology. And this group started to work for me. But this is the part of the video where we are going to start to talk about the things within Men with Umbrellas that actually didn't really work. Men with Umbrellas would start with a Alice in Wonderland inspired episode all about Jefferson Strange, my Mad Hatter character. When I was making this episode, I was set on connecting this with the previous Jefferson Strange character from Sundor 12. So I wanted to treat this like both showing that this character is the Mad Hatter, and also working as something like a prequel to Sundor 12. And I think there's a lot in this episode that actually does really work, and I do really like. The episode starts by introducing the concept that no one gets sick in Wonderland, and Jefferson Strange is confused by that. So we set up a pretty interesting, good story there. Something that's easy to follow, something that's easy to latch onto. But then I kind of went off the rails, I think. And we see Jefferson Strange jumping into a dimension-hopping bathtub, flying into space, talking to a giant eyeball, the giant eyeball telling him that if he takes this puzzle box, then he will have all of his memories and all his power, and he needs to do that because there's this ancient demon that is coming back, and Jefferson Strange, for whatever reason, is the only one that can stop that ancient demon. Now, if you think anything like me, you're probably thinking, what's the problem with that? That all sounds really fun. And I agree with you. Besides that, I think it was too much right away. I think what I should have done is established the character of the Mad Hatter, and then wrapped the elements of the space travel type stuff into a world that more fits the Mad Hatter, and then eventually built more up to the more confusing elements. That way it doesn't feel like me just, throwing things out of my toy box and trying to tell a very disconnected story. Now, I could go through every single episode with you and break down everything I think did and didn't work. But I think ultimately I would end up saying the same thing. That every episode has the foundation of some good ideas, but ultimately lacked the structure. And oftentimes I didn't prioritize what was necessarily good for that particular story that I was telling, instead prioritizing getting certain ideas out in a certain way. And I think there's a lot of value in the Men with Umbrellas episodes. I would encourage you to go and watch them. There's a good chance that you might actually find some enjoyment from them. I know I found a lot of enjoyment in making them, but I also want to evolve my craft and move on to better things. So with that, I want to look at my previous project and sort of take the good and find what I think didn't work so well and throw that away. So with that being said, what am I gonna do different with this new project? How am I gonna keep it more structured, more tidy, and more approachable for audiences? And that's something I'm thinking about right now. I'm not for sure that what I'm gonna do is really going to be the perfect solve. I tend to be a sort of out there storyteller anyway. I'm sure some of my ideas will always feel out there to several audience members, but maybe some of you will like it, and some of you clearly won't. But the point I'm sort of trying to get at is when I look at Men with Umbrellas, there's things in it where I'm like, I could have done that better. So this is me taking steps to do that better. And how am I going to do that? Let's talk about it. So the main thing I want to do differently this time around is I think I need to actually focus less on the story as of a whole, instead focusing on individual episodes and trying harder to tell full stories in individual episodes. But on top of that, the other thing I want to do differently sort of comes back to the sort of baseline point of this video. And that is the heart. What is the heart of this series? Because I feel like when I did Men with Umbrellas, the heart was hard to understand. My versions of these characters were, what if these characters were my versions of them? Right? What if these characters were made for Caedmon? And, well, of course there's always going to be some of that in every story I tell. I want to sort of make something that's easier to understand right off the bat. So I want to find something to sort of just bring the pieces together to make the show that I want to make, but also make a show that kind of makes more sense. Make a show that's easy for you as the viewer to understand what the show is really about. And not as much of you having to try and figure out what my intentions are as you watch the show. But what is that heart? How can I find it? It has to be something that fits into my style of storytelling. It has to be something that fits into my brand, so to speak. But what would that be? That's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure it out.
Something that's been part of my brand, I guess you could say, for quite a long time, but really, I guess, more of something that's been part of my taste in storytelling, has been a little bit creepy. And that's, I like things that are just enough creepy to where you can be like, ooh, that's a little dark, that's a little scary. Now, I don't really care for like full on horror, but I like things that just like to flirt with that line a little bit of like, this is a scary thing. And that's why you see skeletons in so much of my videos, is just because I like that. I think that's really interesting and cool. But with that being said, I don't think just creepiness or horror is exactly the heart for this project that I'm looking for. But I think I am looking for something adjacent to that.
I don't think there's any argument that could be made that superhero comics hasn't played a huge role on my style of storytelling. As a kid, I just loved these comic books. Particularly, Batman, I really liked. I enjoyed so much, again, that little bit of creepiness in the story, but also I just loved the bright colors mixed with the darkness. And that's a lot of what comic books are, at least to me, is bright colored heroes. But also, before there was superhero comics, there was a lot of horror comics. And a lot of that has carried over into the superhero comics. I think particularly in Batman, I love the difference with that mix of sort of like gothic darkness mixed with the bright colors of the Joker or, Robin or so many other characters, where you have this combination of like very dark and very light cartoonishness. And I just love that, and the way it comes together is so cool. Now, in the last 5 years, there is one more thing that has become so influential on my style of storytelling. It's crazy. And that, of course, is my favorite TV show of all time.
It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. I just love this show. Watching it is like watching a part of cultural history. I love the 50s-ish setting, which when the show was made was of course just the modern day. But it's so cool to be able to look back on that and the stories that, toe the line between horror and science fiction and gangsters and detectives. Wait a minute. Detectives. But also, I think why this guy, Batman, one of the things I like so much about him is the fact that he is a detective. And I think that is the heart of the series. I think that is what my pitch is going to be, is fairy tale detective. That's what the series is going to be. So in conclusion, Men with Umbrellas, my new version of this series, is going to be a detective series. So there we go. We've solved the case. We've figured out the heart of my new fairy tale animated series. And that is fairy tales, but detectives. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this new project in the comments section. Of course, subscribe to this channel if you want to keep getting the sort of behind the scenes on this new project I'm making. I also do reviews of science fiction TV shows and stuff like that over here, so if you're interested in that, that's also something that comes out on this YouTube channel. And I'll link, of course, the Men with Umbrellas that you can check out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. It really means a lot that, I would be able to just make these creative things for me, but also that, you would be interested in watching and consuming this stuff as well. That's really something special. So thank you so much. If you liked the way I put this video together, if you liked anything about it, you can hit the like button. If you just hate my face, hit the dislike button. And, that will show me that you hate my face. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to brush your teeth. Come back again when we figure out the name for this new series. Bye.